She asked, when you're working with someone, what do you tend to notice as far as identifying differences between an analyst and a way shower? They are both elders, so there is a similar energy there. It seems that the analyst shows up as understanding the Akashic records, and the way shower holds information through the ancestral realm, which can look similar when they are sharing their wisdom. Also, can you give more insight and examples as to how the elders can work together? It's a really great question. So, let me kind of break this down into little chunks. And I'm actually going to go in reverse order from the way that you worded your question. I'm going to start with how can elders work together? So, this kind of goes in tandem with how can you work with an elder regardless of your star archetype. And one of the kind of signature preferences of working with elder energy or working within an elder space is that it's slightly more formalized, if you will, than working with another star archetype's energy. So we can see this reflected in how all four of them use their primary macrocosmic vigors in order to fulfill their ascendant position, which is making decisions, right? A lot of times, making decisions involves consulting various pieces of information or looking at different variables or using other resources to infer what is the best potential outcome based on the situation that we have at hand, right? So let's go ahead and talk about all four of them. Even though you primarily singled out the analyst and the way shower, which I'm happy to compare and contrast, all four of them have a similar function with how they tend to make decisions and share this information with other people. And it's through this consultative space. So if you are someone who has an elder imprint, you are going to be in your highest and best state of alignment when you have boundaries around how others can approach you for the means of using your energy in some way, right? So, if you want to think about it as, I guess the best analogy that I would have is to kind of talk about the way shower and how they're essentially the modern day oracle of the star type system. So if we think about this kind of oracle character, there's implied boundaries there around who can interact with them for what purpose and when, right? So the same thing would go for any of these four imprints. When we're talking about analysts, one of their key focus points is that they have to be really, really forceful in communicating those boundaries to other people because other people might see the analyst's problem solving ability as something that they can use at their discretion, which they cannot because the analyst is going to become very overwhelmed if they have too many requests from too many people to solve too many problems, right? So, from an organizational perspective, if you're looking at the way that an analyst might function in 3D in their job, if there's someone who is in charge of a lot of information or a lot of facts and figures, they might have a database of information that is only shared with a certain number of people, or maybe it's only just for them, or maybe they're only presenting specific pieces of that database to other people at predetermined times, right? And then with the Akashic record, again, that is a tool for them to use and consult with in a formalized space or a formalized setting. So, presumptively, anytime you open the Akashic record and you're doing it on behalf of asking a question for someone else, you're probably going to be doing it while they're there with you, right? Like If you're in the highest integrity, you're not going to be opening the Akashic records if someone hasn't asked you for information, or opening it on behalf of someone else just because you're curious about what their soul path is, right? So we're operating under the assumption that some sort of appointment has been made. Therefore, you're operating within an energetic boundary or an expectation that this is the appropriate time for these two people to be in this energetic space and for one of them to open up the records on the other person's behalf. The same thing would go for the way shower and how they're often consulted to mediate situations or make decisions. Anyone who wants a good and fair outcome to a conflict probably isn't going to run to a way shower right when it's happening and say, "This person said this about me, please help me," right? If they're going to be working with the best of the best of the best in essentially giving advice or being an anchor for the community, there needs to be a formalized process involved with that. And that also protects Wayshower energy. They walk this fine line between being able to help people through their heart space, which is very potent and is very, very focused on justice, equality, keeping peace, harmony, making sure that everyone is getting along with each other the way they're supposed to. And then on the other side of that line, feeling like all of these requests for their assistance are some sort of emotional burden, right? So, in order to stay on the side of the line that allows them to be in alignment with the frequency of harmony and the frequency of fairness and equal opportunity, and being able to really tap into that shamanic space of discernment, there needs to be boundaries around how other people are approaching them and request that they use their energy. The same thing goes for the creatrix and for the augur. So, for the creatrix, they are not actively going to be going out into other spaces or other groups or jumping up and down, volunteering to share the information that they've gleaned from the timeline. They know that that's not their function and it's not something that feels comfortable to them. So, even though they have natural leadership qualities, they're very, very good at organizing people. And the reason why is because their natural sense of organization comes from their connection to the linear timeline and understanding the mechanics of organized events and the essentially the order of operations. Excuse me, the order of operations. Um, that's what allows them to be a good central anchor to ground the energies of a lot of different people that might be in their orbit, right? But they're not going to go out of their way to display those characteristics or to offer up that information. They have to be approached by other people or by other Starchetypes in order to essentially hand that information over. So I know that sometimes I'll talk about going through what I'm receiving energy update wise and wanting to compare it to what a creatrix might be knowing or seeing. And in order for me to do that, I have to find a creatrix who is willing to volunteer that information. I know that I've talked a little bit about in the multiverse, like this can be kind of difficult to wrap your conscious mind around, but in the multiverse, the way that the Elder Council assembles is actually in the Creatrix chambers. So the Creatrix isn't going anywhere. They have to have their pulse on the events that are unfolding at all times, which takes a lot of their energy. So the analyst and the wayshower and the augur tend to come to them when there are matters of importance that involve everyone that need to be solved, right? There's decisions that need to be made. And then with the augur, I would say arguably it's the most important for them to have very, very strict boundaries around how they're using their mentorship capabilities. Because we've talked a lot about how they're moving away from the false empath template and this sense of needing to be available for all people at all times from an emotional perspective and to be the one who is always there as like a shoulder to cry on. Like they're moving out of that space and into a space where, yes, they are still being approached to give guidance and give mentorship and to help star seeds individually determine, okay, what's the next best course of action for me personally? Because they work very, very well in that one on one space. But they're not going to be doing that in every single space they enter. There's likely going to be a designated space that is only for that kind of emotional availability. And they're not going to be like out in the middle of a bar or a restaurant hearing someone's life story and expected to offer up some sort of support as a result, right? So that's one major function that I think would probably be really helpful for you to be aware of when you're comparing and contrasting any of the elder imprints is thinking about how do they collaborate together and how do they collaborate with the collective. The collective essentially needs to move to them, and then when you shrink that down into a microcosm, the analyst and the way shower and the augur are going to be moving to the creatrix to confer about anything that's happening energetically, anything that's happening cosmically, any really, really big, important timeline fractures or shifts. So I think that that's one of like the main key points to keep in mind. So I know that that sounds like um if you're someone who is a vessel or a conduit, it might sound like the elder Starchetypes are really high maintenance, right? Because you're basically being asked to seek them out if you need something from them, right? Which I guess I can see why you would feel that way. But at the same time, if they're making decisions that are of the highest good on behalf of their whole star family, that also means that if you sit next to them in the conduit position, or if you're kind of affected down the chain in density as a vessel, you can learn a lot by how the elder position in your family sets and enforces boundaries, which is really, really important. That's super important, especially if you're a conduit and you have a lot moving through. I know we've talked a little bit before around conduits having a very difficult sense of being able to keep things or to receive things that are theirs. That's a type of boundary for you to set as a conduit, right? So you might not be setting as many boundaries around who is interacting with you, when and why, and how you're sharing information, but you might be setting more boundaries around discerning what am I receiving that I'm keeping that's just for me versus what am I receiving and then sharing with the collective, right? The vessel might learn from a more physical sense what their boundaries are, like what sensations that they are open or not open to, what types of vibrations or energetics from the environment that they're in or the people that are surrounding them that they are or not available for. So just remember that even though the ascendant positions look like they function very differently on the surface, and they do to some extent, there's no such thing as hierarchy here. Like it's not more important for an elder imprint to say, I'm only available to consult with you on this problem at this day and this time, this place. It's not more important for them to do that as it is for, like, let's say the pharaohs, because I was using the way shower as an example. to say, I'm only going to be in this space for this particular time or on this particular day. And that's the only time I'm going to be transmitting. Hopefully that all makes sense.